I've had problems with cooling ever since I put the 10-to-1 pistons in this overhauled engine that I just did. I put this cooling lip on. That's the last thing I've done. The first thing I did was I made this air intake. Made it out of a piece of billet. I back cut it, or I cut it on a 5-degree angle so that it would bolt up to my nose bowl nice and clean. And so I did that for my new 13-row oil cooler that I mounted. And I'll show you it. So the 13-row oil cooler is mounted on this new bracketry that I did. The 9-row was up above on those old tabs up there. And so I had to come up with a new way of mounting the 13-row. I also, after running the 3-inch scat tube into the 13-row, it just wasn't enough air going through the oil cooler. So I kind of, in a way, a little bit defeated my purpose, because what I was trying to do was close off all the holes in the upper baffling. And so I had to go back to a 3-inch tube on the upper baffling, and then I baffled my box here so that the 3-inch from the upper goes through part of the cooler and the 3-inch from the lower goes through the lower part of the cooler, so they don't mix. So I now have adequate air going through my cooler. I tightened up all my baffling up above where it goes around the channel. There's no holes for the air to get through anymore. One 3-inch hole going in kind of looked funny on the cowling, and it actually made sense to actually pull the air for my cold air cabin and my cabin heat off of another one. So I made another one to match, and I think it looks kind of sexy actually, but that was kind of beside the point. Anyway, I brought the cold air and cabin heat in off this 3-inch scat tube. I split it into two 2-inch. And so now I've got my cabin heat and my cabin heat here and my cold air here. And then I had to add a blast tube off the upper, but I've closed off these two up here that were cabin heat and cold air. So I've tightened that up. The only tube off this side now is just for my blast tube on the PMag that I added. And boy, that PMag's really nice. It really makes the engine run smooth. And I think it gives it more horsepower. I can definitely tell more horsepower with this engine, and just the amount of performance that I've gained is pretty amazing, just overhauling this engine going to 10-to-1 pistons. I've got the cooling issues down now to, before it was running sometimes above 220 at high power settings. I'm now at 192 or 191 on a 60-degree day, turning 24 squared and leaned. So I think I got it fixed. We'll see once summer hits. This morning I am taking off for the Deschutes River. I think the salmon flies might be hatching over there, and so this is what I'm doing today. Time to wake the neighbors and my wife, who won't be happy. Gonna put the power to the 200 plus horsepower and the 2790 RPM. Blow out of here. Not long after takeoff, I spotted this gravel bar that I've flown over many times in the past, and it's been a while since I've landed it. It looked like it had changed, so I decided to make a turn and come back in and land it. It's interesting, this river, I've never spent really any time fishing, and instead I fly for an hour or more to get to a river that produces really no fish. I'm guessing I would have been better off staying where I was. It's kind of ironic that the grass is always greener somewhere else.
Anyway, what a beautiful spot. Next time I decide to fish, I'm coming here. I'm headed for the Deschutes River. There's a fairly well-known airstrip on the lower section of the Deschutes, about 10 miles up from the mouth of the Columbia. Most people know it as Bull Run or Horseshoe. The Deschutes is designated as wild and scenic, and this particular airstrip has been in question for some time. I feel like as long as there's no X's on it, it's open, and I'll continue to use it. The interesting part about this river being wild and scenic is jet boats run up and down it, and there's a train track that runs on the west side, so it's not like you're out in the wilderness. It's hard to find spots to land where there aren't a bunch of rocks, and it's pretty hard to see the rocks in this tall of scrub brush. So I picked a jeep trail. It's not too obvious as to when the last time it was used, but I can see 2 tracks coming down. And I scoped it out pretty good before I went in and landed it. It's on a fairly decent slope, and so I'm landing uphill, taking off downhill, pretty straightforward. Wouldn't want to go off to the right here because it's pretty much a drop off. It doesn't look as steep as it is, but it's you don't want to go too far to the left at this point. And then takeoff is straightforward. Put the power to it, accelerate downhill, fly off into this canyon off the left, and drop down into the Deschutes River. Horseshoe's right below. I've been coming to Horseshoe, or Bull Run, whatever you want to call it, since 1997. So I've used it for 24 years. Pretty regularly, at least once a year. Sometimes more. A few years back, I brought my daughter, and we brought the alpaca rafts. We decided to hike upriver, and we used the train tracks as our trail. You would think that hiking train tracks would not be that much work, but the railroad ties aren't spaced at a very good gait for a human, and after about 4 miles, both of us were feeling it in our calves and decided that we had gone far enough and we were going to put the alpaca rafts in. Well, the Deschutes travels at a pretty good clip. I'm not sure how fast, but I would guess 6 or 7 miles per hour. And it wasn't long before we were back at the airplane. Our adventure took probably half a day, but most of it was walking. As I was fishing this morning along the riverbank, I stepped out of the water and I hear and I'm like, where is it? I'm looking down in the tall grasses and I don't see anything. I reach behind me and grab a stick and I start moving the grasses. Pretty soon I see a rattlesnake. It's about 1.5 feet away from me. It's not very big, and so I grab the stick and I continue to harass it a little bit. I was actually going to get some video of it and show it, but it didn't want to play.
It's 5/14 of 2021, and I just wetted my line on the Deschutes River. Fishing's not too good today. River's really high and fast. I would guess it's mid-70s, maybe climbing towards 80 right now. Not a lot of bugs, not a lot of big bugs. And so the fishing was pretty slow. Caught a couple little ones, under 10 inches. And I'm gonna move on to the John Day River now and try for some smallmouth bass. See if it's a little bit more action there.
If you decide to come to Bull Run for a day, when you land, be careful where you taxi. There are some big rocks. The runway itself is in really good condition. I would be surprised if you couldn't land a 172 here with no problem. I think the John Day River is about a 15-minute flight from here, and normally I would probably spend some time doing some off-airport landings on the John Day, but there's an extreme amount of rafting activity going on right now. So in order not to cause problems for myself or harass rafters, I stay off the water and basically I'm headed for Chucker Flats, which is another known airstrip on the John Day River. En route, I spot this little tabletop, and it brings back memories because about 20 years ago, actually it's been more than 20 years ago, Lonnie and I landed it. Lonnie was in his Super Cub, and I was in my first Maul, M5 235C, November 6269er Mike. I had been doing off-airport quite a bit by then, but this was still a fairly intimidating place to land with the M5. My landing speeds with the M5 were probably almost 20 miles an hour faster than they are with this airplane. And Lonnie said he would let me land it first. Actually, I watched him land it, and then he took off again. And then he said, you go ahead and land it and pull down as far as you can, and then I'll come in and land behind you. Well, he watched me from the air, and when I got done and came to a stop, he said, wow, that looked exciting. And I was pretty shaken. I had used most of it. I was out of sorts going down it, and it was not pretty. But there was a picture of us sitting there together on the end, and I haven't landed it since. In fact, I haven't been this far down the canyon in quite a while, but because I didn't have my GPS coordinates, I entered the canyon quite a bit further down than I normally do for Chucker Flats, and as happenstance, I ended up right over top of it when I flew into the John Day River Canyon, and so it was right there in front of me. This here's the approach into the John Day Chucker Flats airstrip. I'm landing downriver today. There's a big horseshoe bend in the river, so you basically lose your altitude coming around that horseshoe bend. And by the time you turn final, you should be in a good position for making a normal landing. There is a fence to clear, but other than that, there's really nothing to worry about.
Well, I ended up at Chucker Flats, got my rod out, tried to fish for some smallmouth bass. Smallmouth bass weren't biting, so it's really blowing now, and I'm gonna get the heck out of here. It's about 2:30 in the afternoon.
So I head for another one of my favorite spots to fish, closer to home, but the wind is just really blowing. In fact, I let down into this canyon, and I was pretty sorry I did. So I decided to head for home. Well, by the time I get to home, there's obviously no way I'm going to be landing at my home strip with the winds the way they are. And my alternate strips are almost just as bad. So I decided to come down to the Columbia and take a nap and see if the winds will let off a little bit. I'm taking a nap under a Scotch broom bush when I'm awakened by a noise, which ends up being a herd of cattle. And they're staring at my black airplane thinking, what the heck is this? But they want to get by it very badly. So I start playing with them, making noises, and they finally figure out that there's something in the brush. And I thought, I wonder if I could hurt them with my drone. So I fire up the drone and play with the cows for a little while. The day was basically a bust. Other than the flying, there wasn't much action.